big warm welcome back to the Health and Safety Digest, a special podcast by Astutis, and as ever, I am your host on this voyage of environmental health and safety training, digital content writer at Astutis, Toby Howell, and I'm absolutely delighted to give to you this episode of the Health and Safety Digest as we are joined by the creator of the course that we are looking at in this particular episode, Tim Marsh, who, along with a former guest on the show, Jason Anker MBE, does a fantastic job in increasing awareness of mental health and the inclusion of well-being in health and safety. So in this episode, we discuss the new mental health and workplace safety course that will be available very, very soon, just after this podcast goes live. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the new mental health and workplace course. So Tim joins us today with over 20 years of global experience in improving organizational culture. Tim co-founded Anker and Marsh, offering consultancy and very bespoke guidance to organizations all around the world. His partner in crime, Jason Anker MBE, who joined the podcast previously to discuss safety culture, told me, Tim, you are the man to discuss mental health in the workplace and the impact that it has. This nicely leads us on to the fact that you have recently created the Mental Health and Workplace Safety course. And today he joins the Health and Safety Digest to dissect the course and to give our audience a behind the scenes glimpse into the course. So without further ado, Tim Marsh, welcome to the Health and Safety Digest.
Well, thank you, Toby. And the first thing to say is I wish it was just 20 years of experience, frankly. I'd be a lot younger than I am now. It's rather more than that, but just it says 20 years plus. Let's just put it that way, shall we?
20 years plus. Fantastic. Well, firstly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm doing very well. Yeah, I'm top. I wouldn't say I was on top form because of the age issues that we've already discussed, but top-ish form, considering.
Well, I'm very, very glad to finally get you on the podcast. It's been something that we've been looking to do here at Astutis for some time. You are the man in the field to talk to on this topic. And if we may, before we get into the course itself, could you let me and our audience know about your reasoning and motivation in creating the course?
Sure. And I obviously I am one of, I would have to say that I am one of many people who talk well on this subject. My particular angle is that actually, as a psychologist, my first job about 30 odd years ago now was looking at suicidal behavior in army recruits as a sort of a full-on psychologist. But I ended up working in the world of behavioral safety. And specializing in safety psychology, the proactive approach to preventing incidents rather than the reactive, when things have gone spectacularly wrong, and then spent the next 10 years on oil rigs and so on, and then safety culture generally around the world. And in the last 5 years, the whole world of health and safety has really turned very sharply back towards well-being and health, and mental health. So it's for me, it's come home, and why people say kind things about what I say and what I write is that really Britain leads the world in safety. We are one of the safest countries in the world to go to work in. Well, certainly in terms of accidents, maybe less so in terms of health and exposure. But let's keep it simple. And we know what excellence looks like, and we know what methodologies we need to apply to achieve that excellence. But really, in Britain itself, we haven't applied those simple, proven principles to mental health and well-being. And so the world of UK safety really has a very important role to play in showing the world what you do if you want excellent mental health at work.
Out of curiosity, in your own personal opinion, how important would you say mental health is to organizational safety?
Hugely. I mean, the first things first, let's talk about disruption and all the rest of it. So for every person in the UK that we kill in an industrial accident, 32 working age people will kill themselves, which means that huge numbers in the UK, millions in the UK, are having really bad days. And the problem with having a really bad day is all sorts of bad things happen when you're having a really bad day. You make bad decisions, you have bad interactions, you're demotivated usually, unless you're frantic and so on. So so sometimes people can try too hard, but usually you're just demotivated, flat, and having a bad day, and that directly does lead to accidents. So for example, the three factors that we consider. The first one is, if you're having a really bad day, you're probably low in situational awareness and high in being distracted. That's a primary cause of accidents. Second one is, you're probably fatalistic. And we know from the world of excellence that you tend to get the luck that you deserve. What you don't want around high levels of risk is fatalism. And the third one is, of course, you make bad decisions, you have bad interactions, you create a bad environment around you. I give you a really, really simple, horrible case study of a bloke who had a terrible row. His contractor had a terrible row with the on-site supervisor, road building, lost his temper, drove his steamroller at him. And calmed down 15 seconds later. In the film A Fish Called Wanda, this was a really funny scene towards the end of the film. In real life, just outside London, of course, the guy was going to spend quite a bit of time in prison after that. And that kind of instinctive losing your temper, losing your concentration, getting aggressive, being indignant, all that stuff is just not good for safety. So you find a very strong correlation. Best to sum it up with a quote. I've got a good friend called Laura Thomas. She was a barrister in the world of safety, and now works as an executive for organisations. So, at the Old Bailey and in big investigations, almost every single time, somebody right at the centre of the investigation was having a really bad day, one way or the other. That kind of sums it up. I mean, obviously, it's not a perfect correlation by any means, but
Well, no, it's really, really fascinating, because I remember having your colleague Jason Ankrenby on the pod, and he was describing the idea that it is that kind of unseen, invisible problem that organizations have a very, very hard time trying to decipher or sort out. And that was going to lead very nicely onto my next question, and it's regarding the course, because obviously what you touched on there kind of hints at stuff that is kind of analysed and investigated more thoroughly in the course. What can organisations who might have listened to what you've just said there and think that relates to us, what could they expect from this course in particular?
Well, the idea of this course is just to outline initially why mental health is important. I think the answer to the last question attempted that. People with poor mental health, or people who are just having really bad days, are more likely to make bad decisions and have bad interactions and experiences in any number of ways, even just being rude to a client and so on. So it's to outline why it's important. It's to outline how organizations can impact on that, primarily through understanding that good work is good for you. And if you have a job that you enjoy and is stimulating and engaging, you are mentally healthier than if you don't need to work at all. Of course, the opposite is also true. And huge amounts of what happens to people at work, I don't mean people who are just about to have a breakdown and you have to take them to one side and talk them down. I'm talking about everybody on a typical day. We all have bad days, and we all have elements of every day that's suboptimal. And it's just, what can organizations do? If I can give you a really simple example, that illustrates how this works. We know from safety culture excellence that people are not told, go and do something risky and dangerous. They're not told that. What they're told is, I want this job doing safely, but by Friday. And what that means is, as we understand the back brain now and how we make decisions often subconsciously, is, I want you to do this job by Friday as safely as you can. And what you get is, you get the job done by Friday as safely as is viable, and corners are cut and risk mounts up. We know that. That's kind of classic safety culture stuff. So we often stress, what you really need to say is safely and by Friday. And if there's a problem with that, let's get a Coke and a Mars bar and sit around the table and talk that through. Now, the most obvious outcome of that is an analysis of the risk, and that's much better risk management because you come up with a much better solution and a job design. Yeah. But the second thing is it's a really adult way of talking to somebody. It's treating them with respect. It's valuing their experience and expertise. It's adult to adult. Now, what you also get from that, of course, is a richer, better, more empowered and engaged work environment, which is better for your mental health. So all this stuff is just tied up,
Apologies, everything you said there just really clicked into my head, and it really touches on this idea of being more proactive than reactive, not waiting for the bad thing to happen before it happens, if that makes sense. And I think that is a new attitude in the arena of health and safety and well-being, in the idea that we are now taking a more less passive and more kind of proactive approach to trying to combat poor mental health. If we may, can we go through the course, starting with Module 1, which is entitled The Impact of Mental Health on Safety? And my interpretation, going through the course, is that it analyzes, it introduces learners on the course to the consequences of good and bad mental health. Is that right?
It is, and frankly, in short, we've just discussed that. We've been discussing chapter 1, really. So that's what we're talking about.
It's very interesting to me when we talk about organizational well-being or health and safety, this idea that people don't understand, or there's this kind of internal battle about whether staff should go to the HR department or their line managers and notify them of their having a bad day, a bad morning, poor mental health, or whether it should be a kind of general underlining theme in a business that they should proactively enroll their staff anyway. What would be your interpretation on that?
Both. We talk about the strategy that an organization needs to adopt, and it's incredibly simple. We know that it's good to talk. We know that actually it's good for the organization to be asked for help. One of the 5 key elements of well-being is to be able to help people, to contribute, as well as mental health, relationship health, and so on. So it's good to talk. It's good to be asked for help. It's all part of a strong culture to be giving and taking help. So that's a key element. And what you want to do is as proactive as possible so that people don't go pop. They do go to Arc Health. They do Ring Mind. They do take up yoga in the evenings and the free yoga classes and mindfulness and so on. All the stuff that stops them going over the edge. But the second thing is, the really proactive thing, and again, from the world of safety, we know that proactive is always better than reactive. And the world, in this case, is just creating a job that is good for you. Good work is good for you, and bad work is bad for you. So, rather than worrying about individuals and whether or not they're about to go pop because of things they brought in from home, because they're arguing with their boss, because they've got health issues, they're on medication, et cetera, all the stuff that individuals have, just create a really strong, thriving, healthy organizational culture, and you bring a lot of people with you quite naturally.
And that's what this course sets out to.
It is to jump ahead to the modules, with case studies and illustrations. One section really says, well, okay, but we do have to do the reactive stuff. We do have to spot that people are struggling. How do we spot that people are struggling, and what are the golden rules for stepping in? So golden rule number 1 is step in, because a lot of people will walk past and say, well, I could make it worse. I didn't like to, I could make it worse. When people are in trouble, you can't. you can say good things, but you can't really say bad things. And so we encourage people to follow the golden rules of coaching, not telling, and don't give advice, just listen, and so on. And the second element is just really all about how do you create a strong, thriving, supportive, engaging, empowering culture. And if you're doing all that, your mental health issues will be taking care of themselves to a great extent. We're still talking about the 32-to-1 ratio. It's a huge issue. It's an ongoing guerrilla war, to quote James Reason. You can't win it. All you can do is fight it really, really smartly, and it delays the inevitable defeat as long as possible. And so that's what the modules cover.
Well, interestingly, we're talking there about establishing that system, about what it takes to establish that system in an organization. Module 2, which is entitled "What is Mental Health," I think, quite clearly tries to define and then maybe illustrate the impact, well, or in very much so, what mental health is. What else could you tell us about module 2, and indeed the message there that we're trying to compound?
Sure. Toby, that's a very good question. Because when we're talking about mental health, a lot of people have the assumption you either have it, I have good mental health, or I have bad mental health. It's a switch. It's a linear thing. It's a X or zero thing, and it isn't at all. We all have mental health all day, every day, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. On different days, different parts of the day, etc., etc. And when you look at, obviously you've got things like psychosis, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, all sorts of really serious stuff that means you're probably on talking therapy as well as drugs and so on, the really serious stuff. But 85% of mental health at work is just depression and anxiety. And depression is merely thinking about things that have happened in a negative way. Now, you're allowed to do that as a prompt to learning, but everything else is, a cognitive behavioral therapist would say, well, that's every minute you spend thinking of something that's already happened in a negative way is a minute wasted. It's gone, say prompt to learning aside. Anxiety is just thinking about something that hasn't happened yet in a negative way. And again, a prompt to excellence and effort is one thing, but it's every minute you spend just worrying about something that hasn't happened yet steals a minute from you trying to make it not happen. And so the vast majority of mental health at work is just either depression or anxiety, and of course we bounce back between the two. And we all do all of those things every day, every single one of us. It's just whether or not we hit critical, and so what we're trying to do as an organization is reduce the amount of depression and anxiety knocking about by helping create positive thinking. I don't mean positive thinking as in I'm great and I'm going to succeed. I mean just generally less depressive thoughts, less anxious thoughts, more in the moment thoughts. Hence mindfulness and meditation and all that stuff that has had some airtime recently. What is mental health? It's an impossible to answer question, but as a working rule, it is thinking unhelpful stuff to an extent that doesn't actually get in the way.
Very, very articulated, Tim. And I think when people think about mental health, when it's brought up, it's always imagined in the more negative light. And I think that's that stigma that this course is trying to address. Like you say, everyone has mental health. It's something that exists, but it's about trying to utilize it to your advantage and not get, well, for the lack of a better term, getting stuck into your head too much. Interestingly, module 3, which is called Supporting Struggling Workers, I think is a really, really intriguing module. It looks to identify and investigate how to spot those who are obviously struggling. And it introduces the CER model of investigation. And I would be really, really intrigued to hear more about that.
Sure. How to spot people? Well, again, if you've got a strong culture that involves lots of dialogue and conversation and people actually getting on with each other, people well, and it's really easy to spot when they're not themselves. The quiet ones who've gone chatty, the chatty ones who've gone quiet, the normally conscientious ones who've gone a bit sloppy, and so on and so on and so forth. You just kind of know, and then what the care model says, okay, so you spot that Toby's having a bad day. What do you do? And there were lots of models around, and they're often care models, CARE, and you get these acronyms that make a nice word that you must remember, and two of them mean the same thing, and they're not in the right order. So we went for the care model to try and simplify it. And I'm a great believer nothing should be in more than threes. Anything more than three and you can't remember it. And the older I get, the more that's true. Education, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. You find that throughout history, you want things in threes. So the care model, CER, and that's curious empathy, followed by refer, or reflect, or actually reflect or refer. And what that means is we don't want people to be judging people. We want them to be empathic in a curious way. So open-ended questions, most obviously. How are you, Toby? How are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? So it's just open-ended empathy, and not closed questions like, you're all right,
Right.
aren't you? Yeah, you are good, excellent. I thought you might be struggling, but you've just confirmed that you're all right, so I can crack on and get on with my day. Could have been really inconvenient there. So curious empathy, open-ended questions, proper listening, and hence listening skills and so on. And then reflect or refer is what you really want is coaching questions. Don't give people advice. You'll be all right. My sister had this and she's fine. You stick with, how are you? What are you going to do about it? Is it a good idea to do this maybe? Yeah. So, and you want the person on the receiving end to say, well, it might be actually, and you get that little internal promise. That's the only promise that means anything. And then, of course, refer is, if it's really obvious we've got a problem here, and actually I'm going to go away and leave Toby on his own now, but I'm a bit worried about that because he looks like he's really struggling to me. Maybe you should ring your doctor or OC Health or the helpline or the EA program, or Mind, or any of the Samaritans, or any number of wonderful organizations that might be able to help you when there's a crisis. So curious empathy, reflect or refer.
I think that's utterly fascinating. It almost offers a kind of blueprint on how to approach those who are struggling. And I know for myself, if I found myself in a situation like that, that would be such a useful asset, because as we could probably tell, I've probably butchered this interview. Never mind talking to someone who's struggling at work. So I think that's a really useful, really useful module. But Module 4 is by far my most intriguing module, because it is probably most important to organizations. It is called Creating a Positive Culture. And it will offer that kind of guide, won't it, to how organizations can take those steady steps on how to improve attitudes towards culture.
Sure, and we've covered one of the key elements of that, which is to treat people like adults and not pretend to be curiously empathic, but to actually be curiously
Right.
empathic, and all that. But another example, and we've known about mental health at work for decades. This guy called Peter Waugh, working at the Sheffield University, came up with his vitamin model of mental health at work, and we all knew about it as academics 30 years ago. But it's only in the last 5 years that people have started to employ it. And he talks about the key elements of a job that really help you. I'll give you a very simple example. He talks about autonomy, for example. How much autonomy do you have? And he calls it the vitamin model because he says, look, you can have too much of a good thing. And so if you are a supervisor considering who Toby is and what Toby wants from his job today, and I can think about, there are several, opportunity for control, opportunity for growth, and so on. But autonomy, like if you're the sort of person who really needs lots and lots of autonomy, you end up like myself. You have to be self-employed. There's no other way to get through the week, and I've been self-employed now for about 35 years. If you're the sort of person who doesn't like a lot of autonomy, give them the level of autonomy I've enjoyed for 35 years. They'd never sleep. They'd never get through the night. So it's all about tailoring the individual role best you can to suit the person you're dealing with. Some people go crazy if they haven't got an opportunity to learn things and so on. And when we talk about interpersonal contact, some people like a lot of interpersonal contact. Some people like very little interpersonal contact. But we all know that everybody wants good quality interpersonal contact. So it's, so that module also covers what does good quality interpersonal contact look like. So there's a little bit in there on how to give negative feedback in a constructive way, biff off, and a bit on active listening and so on. And just generally the building blocks of a strong, empowering, engaging culture.
I think this is honestly fantastic, an incredibly important course. And if we may finally, the final module, module 5, which is entitled Looking After Yourself, it promises to give learners a toolkit on sustaining that positive well-being and, most importantly, reducing stress. What what would your viewpoint on module 5 be? Because it is the conclusion, it is the last thing that people will come out of the course trying to harness. How important is looking after yourself?
Well, I'm afraid I can't claim anything unique here. Stephen Covey wrote the book, The Seven Habits of the Highly Effective, many years ago, and sold quite a few copies of it. So it's a rehash of what we all know, because if you read a newspaper or listen to a news article, you know exactly what you need to do to look after yourself: sleep well, eat well, enjoy good relationships, take lots of exercise, etc., etc., etc. I'm hoping that just a reminder of those key truths.
Is it really that simple, though? Is it really as
Yes.
simple as sleep
Yeah,
and...
yeah. Well, obviously, if you've got bad genetics or you've been through a horrendously traumatic experience, it clears the pitch, obviously. But the basics are really simple. So I'll give you an example, Toby. You're a schizophrenic. You're absolutely diagnosed schizophrenic, but you're on the right medication. You are getting a good night's sleep. You are eating well. You are exercising. You are managing your relationships calmly, etc., etc. You're probably having a much better day mentally than an average person. It's because it's all about it's all about just how much gubbins is going on. And
Right.
if and if you're managing your gubbins really well, and how to manage that, sleep well. There's nothing more important than a good night's sleep. And you are what you eat, so eat well. And don't drink too much coffee, and certainly don't come to work half cut from the night before and sleep on the sofa and have a blazing row with your partner just the last thing you do before you leave the house. Give the kids a cuddle and then go down the gym via your meditation and look yoga class and so on. We know all this stuff. It's just really, really, it's just not new, is it?
Cutting down the coffee, I might have trouble with, Tim. I am a bit of a self-confessed addict of coffee, but thank you very much for being able to run through the course with us today. I honestly, I can't wait to see the impact this kind of course has on organizations and individuals around the world. It really promises to help, and so thank you very much for that. You are a very, very busy man. Where can our audience find you, Tim?
Well, I with Astutis, I'm doing a conference down in Farnborough in a few weeks. If they want to come and have a chat with myself with Bren, and we're going to do a joint presentation down there. There are a fair few YouTube clips knocking around. There are some books on Amazon and so on. So not difficult to track down, really. But Toby, while I'm on, you talked about the environment. You said you're a coffee addict. Don't have any coffee tomorrow morning. Give me a ring about 11 o'clock. Tell me how you feel.
That's if I'm still awake, Tim.
You will be awake, but you have a blinding headache. You won't be able to concentrate. You'll be grumpy. You'll be bad-tempered. You'll be sad. You'll be a whole bunch of stuff. Just to illustrate how the environment works on all this stuff.
It might not be an enjoyable phone call for you, but I will do my best to remember, Tim. I hope I'm not as grumpy.
Bring a colleague to tell us how you're doing.
I will do my best. Tim, thank you ever so much I know you're a very, very busy man, so thank you ever so much for taking your time on the podcast today. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, Toby, you're more than welcome. Thank you for having me.
And well, there you have it. I would like to extend a big, warm Astutis thank you to Tim Marsh for joining us on the Health and Safety Digest. So just so that you are aware, listeners, we were talking about the Mental Health and Workplace Safety course. It will be available very, very soon. And for more information on the course, please do head over to our website, www.astutis.com. And we also have blogs that analyse whether the course is really right for you or your organisation. And alternatively, you can find us on social media. Just type in Astutis and you will most probably find us. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed understanding the course as much as I have. I've truly been given some more forensic insight into the world of mental well-being. And if you would like to follow Tim even closer, he will be attending SHW Live in Farnborough on the 27th and 28th of September with us. So please do be sure to attend. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.